What was your life's lowest point, and how did you manage to overcome it?
I remember that day as if it were yesterday. My son, full of life and hope, was brutally murdered during an attack at the home of our longtime friend, Sarah, where he was staying overnight. Sarah was like a second mother to him, and he often visited her. This time, he came to her after a fight with his friends and wanted to stay overnight to calm down and think about his future. The trauma was unbearable. He was tied up and subjected to horrific torture, and then suffered multiple stab wounds and shots from a BB gun. He lay on the floor for 30 agonizing minutes until Sarah returned from work and called an ambulance. But it was too late. In the hospital, his heart stopped, and I was left with grief that seemed eternal. The trial of the killers was long and grueling, but in the end, justice was served. They received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, and I, not being a supporter of the death penalty, was grateful for it. However, as life has shown, justice does not always bring comfort. After the tragedy, I found myself in a world that seemed alien to me. I tried to find solace in nature, taking long walks in the forest where I could express my emotions and temporarily forget the pain. I also started painting, and every brushstroke was like a cry from the soul, helping me release the accumulated anger and sadness. I continued to cry, and the pain remained, but I learned to live with it. Every night, I fell asleep with tears in my eyes, wondering when the pain would become bearable. It's been almost 4 years, and although the pain hasn't passed, it has become slightly more tolerable. I've learned to find comfort in memories of my son, and I began sharing them with others to help them understand how short and fragile life is. But for now, I continue to live, and in my heart, there remains hope that one day the pain will become just a memory, not reality. And maybe on that day, I will finally find the peace I yearn for. But for now, it remains just a dream, and I continue on this path, step by step, in search of healing that may never come. In my dreams, I still see his smile, and I wonder what would have been if everything had been different. But life doesn't give answers to such questions, and I remain with only memories and hope for a better future.
After giving birth to my son, I found myself in the darkest place I'd ever been. I'd dreamed of being a mother my whole life, talked about it since I was a child. I had him at 29, right after I got married, and the reality of it was beyond anything I could have prepared for. He was colicky, and I was completely alone. My husband couldn't take any time off work, and my family was miles away. The isolation was unbearable. At around 5 months, I was at the brink of giving up entirely. I actually planned to jump out of our second-floor window. But just a day before, I finally reached out for help, even though I felt like I was at my lowest. I threw myself into the support I was given. I started on antidepressants, I was raw and honest with my therapist, and I arranged for a nanny to live with us full-time for 2 months so I could focus on my mental health. I recognize this was an enormous privilege, one I will always be deeply thankful for. But I also needed something that would remind me I was still a person beyond being a mother. So I began coaching at a local high school, and those girls, they gave me a sense of normalcy that I didn't know I was missing, a glimpse of who I was before everything became about surviving the next day. Somehow I pulled through. My son will be turning 3 soon, and now he's the light of my life. If you're reading this and struggling, please hear me. Please reach out for help. I know it feels like it's never going to end, but I promise you, you will make it out. You're stronger than you know, and there is hope on the other side.
When I was 25, my world was shaken to its core. My father, who had struggled with alcoholism alongside my mother, passed away from a heart attack at just 54. I was left to navigate the challenges of caring for my mom, who was also battling addiction, while fighting my own demons with substance abuse. Despite these obstacles, I persevered. I worked tirelessly, eventually landing 2 jobs and even starting my own company. Along the way, I met my fiancée, who became a source of strength and support. However, life had another test in store for me. Last year, I lost my mother at the age of 61. The pain was immense, but I found solace in knowing that I had been able to provide for her in her final months. I had bought her an apartment and hired a caretaker to ensure she was comfortable and well cared for. Even now, I still face struggles, but I'm determined to keep moving forward. I've been in therapy before and I've recently returned to it, recognizing the importance of mental health. Additionally, I found a new passion in boxing, training 3 times a week for the past 6 months. It's been a transformative experience, helping me channel my emotions and find balance in life. As I look back, I realize that life may not always be easy, but it's worth fighting for. My message to anyone facing similar challenges is simple. Never give up. Keep pushing forward, no matter how dark things seem, because the light at the end of the tunnel is worth it.
In one fateful day, my life came crashing down like a house of cards. My husband, who had been living a double life, was caught cheating. In a panic, he abandoned us, leaving me with 2 tiny kids, 2 and 5 years old. His reckless behavior cost him his job, and I soon discovered he had forged my signature on our bank accounts. We lost our home, which was tied to his employment. Within 24 hours, I was left alone, without a roof over my head and no access to money. At that moment, I was on the brink of despair and even thought about the unthinkable, but my love for my kids wouldn't let me give up. I gathered my last ounce of strength and started from scratch. I sold his car, took the cash, and rented a small place. I went back to college, worked as a cleaner to make ends meet, and eventually earned a degree. I became a teacher and dedicated myself to raising our kids. Years went by, and my children grew into amazing individuals. I built a new life, full of purpose and love. As for my ex-husband, he tried to come back, but it was too late. I had become strong and independent, and he no longer had a place in my life. I showed him and myself that even in the darkest moments, you can find the strength to start anew and create a better future. And that was my greatest victory.
About 5 years ago, I realized I had a severe problem with booze. What started as casual weekend partying escalated into a daily habit of downing over 10 drinks most nights. It wasn't long before I found myself on multi-day benders, waking up with no memory of the past few days, and experiencing crippling panic attacks whenever I tried to stay sober. I had finally scheduled a counseling session for a Saturday, but in a moment of reckless abandon, I decided to have one last hurrah on the Friday before. I thought it would be a harmless day of drinking, but by 2 p.m., I was blackout drunk, watching A Star is Born in a haze. The movie's tragic ending somehow resonated with me, and in a dark moment, I decided that I couldn't face living sober. I planned to end my life in the garage, unable to imagine a future without alcohol. Fate intervened when my wife came home early from work. She found me in a state of despair and immediately called for help. I was taken into involuntary psychiatric care and underwent detox, but in a moment of foolish pride, I refused to enter rehab. The scare was enough to keep me sober for a while, but eventually, I fell back into my old habits, harder than ever. It took hitting rock bottom again for me to finally seek real help. I checked into rehab and, this time, I listened and followed through on the advice I was given. It wasn't easy, the next few years were rough, filled with ups and downs, but I slowly began to rebuild my life. I learned to face my demons, to find strength in vulnerability, and to live a life free from the grip of addiction. Today, I'm grateful for that second chance and for the support that helped me stay on the path to recovery.
For 30 years, I was trapped in a toxic relationship with a narcissistic partner who was slowly draining the life out of me. His verbal and mental abuse had become a constant companion, eroding my self-worth and leaving me a shadow of my former self. I knew he wasn't well, and a part of me feared that if I left him, his self-neglect would ultimately be his demise. So, I stayed, sacrificing my own life for his, trapped in a cycle of despair. One day, I hit rock bottom. I found myself sitting on the floor, tears streaming down my face, praying to anyone or anything that would listen, a desperate plea for salvation from the hell I was living in. I'm not a spiritual person, but in that moment, I was willing to try anything. The desperation was suffocating, and I felt like I was drowning in a sea of hopelessness. Then, 2 weeks later, he passed away. And instead of grief, all I felt was an overwhelming sense of relief. It was as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, and I could finally breathe again. But the journey to healing was far from over. 2 years have passed, and I'm slowly coming back to life, rediscovering who I am outside of that toxic relationship. However, the memories still linger, haunting me like a ghost from my past. It will take time for them to fade, but I'm determined to rise from the ashes, stronger and more resilient than ever. This experience taught me that sometimes, the hardest battles are the ones we fight within ourselves. But it also showed me that even in the darkest moments, there is always a glimmer of hope, a chance to break free and start anew. And that's a lesson I'll carry with me for the rest of my life.